After Hitler pushed through Europe and into France, his next conquest, England, stood up to him in defiance. Only 90 miles from the French coast, the British Isles were in danger of invasion from the sea and bombardment from the air. It was in the air war that English pilots of the RAF distinguished themselves and would forever be credited with winning the Battle of Britain. George Unwin was a Spitfire pilot in the Royal Air Force. This is where he would meet the enemy, in the skies over war-torn Britain, on the battlefront. In the fall of 1940, Hitler turns his blitzkrieg on Western Europe. His targets are Holland, Belgium, and France. The German war machine easily scores one victory after another. "338,000 British troops are pushed back to the coast of France at Dunkirk and saved only by a massive armada of English ships. Now poised at the Channel, Hitler tries to talk the English into surrender. When they resist, he orders his chiefs of staff to begin work on a secret plan for the invasion of England. The code name is Operation Sea Lion. Before the Germans can cross the Channel, they must eliminate the only remaining British defense, the Royal Air Force. German Air Minister Reich Marshal Hermann Göring is given the responsibility for the air battles that will cripple England. Hitler plans to force British fighter pilots into the air so the Luftwaffe can drastically reduce their numbers, paving the way for any big offensive in the future. By July, 1,500 German bombers and over 1,000 fighters are concentrated within easy flying distance of the United Kingdom. They wreak havoc on English shipping in the Channel. With the German forces about to strike England, the situation looks hopeless. Their first line of defense are the Hurricanes and Spitfires. One of the young RAF flyers piloting a Spitfire is George Unwin.
The thing about the Spitfire that was so useful in combat was its maneuverability. One of the things that frightens pilots to death is a spin. The Messerschmitt, the German fighter, was particularly bad on high-speed stall. And so we could turn inside any of the German fighters, and that was the one thing that saved us time and time again. Invariably in a fight, you're chasing each other round and round and round, but you could turn much more tight, smaller turning circle than any German fighter. The aircraft was perfect in every possible way.
Aircraft production is operating at maximum capacity, but the RAF still only has 620 planes. British flyers are outnumbered by at least 2 to 1 by their German counterparts. England's defenses are increased by a chain of radar stations around the coast. But in other ways as well, Britain is prepared for the inevitable conflict. The people of London evacuate children to the country and strengthen anti-aircraft defenses. Faced with air attacks and a possible invasion, the British remain undaunted under Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who rejects German suggestions of a British surrender.
I was one of the lucky boys. I'd been flying for 4 years when the war started. I had 600 hours flying on fighters. You can't count in any other way the advantage that gave to me. We had the experience and the ability to fly. Flying is experience. The more you fly, the better you get. But the Germans were pretty good too.
Well, the Luftwaffe had been built carefully over a period of years. So they had experienced pilots, combat pilots who had flown in Poland, who had flown earlier in the year in France and Holland. So the Luftwaffe had a high level of competence, high level of training and experience. Also, the morale of the Luftwaffe was very high. They had found nothing that could compete with them. And they felt that they could beat any Air Force, and they had the numbers, the experience, and the morale.
By the end of July, the English managed to dominate the skies, but they have been forced to cancel all ships sailing through the channel during daylight.
The German bombers were nearly always escorted by fighters, and the Spitfire, with its greater speed and maneuverability, eventually it was decided that they should take on the fighters, leaving the Hurricanes free to attack the bombers. Of course, the Hurricane firepower was so concentrated he could shoot down the bombers as fast as they could put them up, providing they were not interfered with. And so our orders were to take on the escort, keep the escort away from the Hurricanes, who would then do the necessary and shoot down the bombers as far as possible. I know the German pilots had fought a war in Spain, and the experienced ones, but they weren't all experienced. And as the fight went on, it was becoming obvious that their replacements were nowhere near as good as their predecessors. The Germans always flew in pairs, you see. We flew stupidly in threes for a while until we tumbled to it. But in pairs, you collared onto a German, got behind him. It was 10 to 1 that the other German was behind you.
One of the things that the Luftwaffe really miscalculated was the effectiveness of the British defenses. The British had radar, which helped them enormously. And also, the British had so many airfields that were sprung up all over Britain, they could scramble fighter planes quickly. And the British fighters, the Spitfires, proved to be superior to anything the Germans had.
By August, Goring estimates that he needs only 4 days to put the English fighter planes out of action. He begins preparations for Adler Tag, or the Eagle attack, an operation which will be the knockout blow to the RAF. It is decided that the attack will commence on August 13th. For the first time in history, a great campaign is going to be fought and decided in the air.
Well, if you were a bomber pilot, you'd be awakened at 4 o'clock in the morning because all the raids would be conducted at dawn. You'd have breakfast, you'd have your briefing, and at 5:30 or 6 before dawn, you would take off so that the flight over England would come at a time when the sun was rising behind you. Then there was a reason for that also. If you were flying from Germany to England, you'd be flying out of the rising sun, which would make it more difficult to see the bombers. And then you'd try to drop the bombs and make the run for home. On the run home, you were completely in daylight, and the Spitfires were able to shoot down large numbers of German planes and pilots. The Germans had the long flight from Germany to Britain and back again, and the odds were with the defenders because they had better planes and they didn't have to fly as far.
From morning until evening, the Luftwaffe carries out a relentless attack. In spite of the bad weather and heavy opposition, they manage to hit airfields, dockyards, and aircraft factories. But in the process, they lose 45 of their aircraft. The British lose only 13.
Killing people, that didn't come into it. We weren't trying to kill people, we were trying to shoot the aircraft down, stop it hitting other people. The bloke sitting in the airplane, we never thought of. I didn't anyway, and I don't think many people did.
2 days later, on August 15th, Goring again puts his squadrons in the air. He hopes that the heavy fighting of the 13th has so severely depleted the RAF that gaps will be left in their defenses. It is to be a day of hard fighting.
German strategy was to bomb England into submission. To do that, they fought with fighters protecting the bombers to fly over Britain. Unescorted bombers could still get away with flying over the Channel and over Britain because they were armed with machine guns. They had 3 guns on each bomber, and they had turrets in which they could shoot 360 degrees.
On this day, the Luftwaffe has gotten nearly 1,800 flights in the air. They had expected an all-out victory. Instead, Adler Tag is a failure. It is the first decisive defeat that the German Air Force has suffered in the war. Because of the heavy casualties, especially among the bomber crews, the German High Command is shaken. After a brief lull due to bad weather, the Luftwaffe again attacks with renewed vigor. For the British, the situation is becoming more serious. They are still shooting down more enemy planes than they themselves are losing. But they have now come to a point where the loss of a single plane, or the death or wounding of even one pilot, represents an important setback. The Germans continue to hammer away at the nerve centers of the Royal Air Force Command. The repair and maintenance squadrons do their best with the overused aircraft, but it's the loss in pilots that is most damaging. Fighter command strength had stood at 1,400 pilots at the end of July. 3 weeks later, it has fallen to 1,000. The pilot forces are being dangerously diminished. The communication systems and airfields are being battered. Even the pilot reserves are reaching desperate lows. Now the question is, how much longer can Fighter Command hold out? How much longer before the Luftwaffe deals its final crushing blow? How many more days can the English withstand the onslaught? Anxious to put an end to the British standoff, the Germans choose a course of action that will strengthen England's resolve. On August 24th, 200 German bombers are sent to attack targets in many different areas of England and Wales. The pilots do not have specific orders to bomb London, but bombs are dropped on the city. The Germans later deny that the bombing is intentional and place the blame on faulty navigation and mixed messages.
Bombing of London certainly must have been planned. Given the German planning and the devotion to detail and following orders, it's almost inconceivable that the bombing of London could have been accidental, especially given the fact that the Germans targeted the east end of London particularly because they were trying to bomb an area in which they knew that there were a lot of Jews in London living.
The British immediately send their bombers on a retaliatory raid against Berlin. The effect of this raid on Hitler is out of all proportion to the damage done.
Hitler was absolutely flabbergasted. He had promised the German people that no bombs would ever fall on Berlin. And when the British did begin to bomb Berlin, Hitler went almost insane, swearing revenge, swearing he would bomb whole cities off the map. But the Allies had so many planes, there really wasn't by that time anything he could do.
The Luftwaffe is now ordered to switch the offensive from the RAF to the City of London. Hitler believes that a prolonged bombing of London will cause panic and mass hysteria among the population. But the side effect is that the airfields and sector stations are spared at a crucial moment. The RAF is given time to repair the damage done to their facilities and equipment. It also takes the pressure off their fighter pilots. One more week of attacks might have led to disaster. Now the RAF can reconsolidate its forces. Late in the afternoon of Saturday, September 7th, the Germans launch their new strategy. From a forward airbase, Göring himself watches the flights take off toward the English coast. The attack is planned to coincide with factory closings when the most civilians will be exposed. Tons of high explosives and many thousands of incendiary bombs are dropped on London within an hour and a half. The docks and warehouses and the densely packed residential areas which surround them burn furiously. The blaze is visible for miles. The fire started in this raid cannot be put out before more bombers return later that night with another load. All of London seems to be burning. Between 5 o'clock in the evening of September 7th and 3 o'clock the following morning, German bombs kill 1,000 Londoners. Hermann Goering announces proudly on German radio that the Germans have reached an historic hour. The Luftwaffe has delivered its thrust right into the enemy's heart. The next day brings extreme tension and many rumors to London. Some believe that the firestorm is just a prelude to a German invasion. However, the first requirement for a successful invasion has not yet been met. The English Fighter Command is still operating. Hitler decides to await the outcome of the next few days. The British Air Force meets the enemy head-on. The result, fewer than half the German planes succeed in dropping their bombs. Hitler, still hoping that the British will crumble under the repeated attacks on their capital, again postpones his decision to invade. He has been assured that air supremacy is almost within his grasp. The Luftwaffe is now facing a crisis. They must claim victory without any more delay. Goering picks Sunday, September 15th, as the day of reckoning. The morning of September 15th turns out to be ideal flying weather, cloudless and with fine visibility. At about 10:30 a.m., the radar warning system picks up enemy planes gathering over the French coast.
I knew there were a hell of a lot of raids coming in. So I'm at 25,000 feet, so I started looking for some trade, as we used to call it. And I saw this huge armada of bombers coming in, forgetting all about their escort fighters. And I flew straight into the middle of the escort fighters on my own. And I was surrounded with it, whizzing all over the place. So I just simply put the Spitfire into a really tight turn. And every time one of these flashed past me, I pressed the button. But I got away with it and actually shot one down, I think. Its psychological effect upon the German fighters and bombers was incredible. Their morale was down to start with, because they were losing every fight they got into. And they were being told that one more big push and it's all over. And they believe this and they come over and they suddenly see 60 fighters, not just a squad. And they've been told we've got none left at all. So the effect on their morale must have been enormous. And the younger pilots, who we found out were far, far inferior to the ones we'd been up against, say, at Dunkirk. They were no match for us at all.
The great battle, which rages all day, was to have crushed fighter command. It is instead a shattering blow to the German airmen. The Luftwaffe has been routed. Again, Hitler's gamble has lost. Goering still insists that 4 or 5 more days of heavy fighting will swing the balance. But as far as the invasion is concerned, time has run out.
The tactical result of the German defeat in the Battle of Britain was that Hitler had to give up on the idea of invading England because he could not get air superiority over the Channel.
But Hitler has decided on a new phase of the battle. The German Luftwaffe now sets out with vengeance to destroy London. Night after night, until well into November, London is bombed unmercifully. If the Germans have failed in their destruction of British air power, they intend to succeed in their efforts to break the spirit of Londoners. After 57 days of consecutive bombardment, Londoners prove that they can take it. It is a time when the British, and particularly Londoners, are seen at their best. By November, the night raids are expanded to include the industrial cities of Britain. Coventry is viciously attacked on November 14th, as are Bristol, Southampton, and Liverpool. Plymouth, Sheffield, Manchester, Leeds, and Glasgow also become targets for the bombers. The firebombing of England would continue through November of 1941, and 25,000 civilian lives would be lost, but it would not break the English spirit. Some German pilots shot down in the air battles make it back to France and then see their homeland from the inside of a hospital. Those who recover are sent back into service. George Unwin would continue to fly with the RAF and be credited with shooting down 14 enemy planes. He would always be grateful for his aircraft.
If we hadn't had the Spitfire during 1940, then things would have been very, very bad. We would have lost the air battle and we would have lost the war.
During the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe lose over 2,300 aircraft. The British lose 600 fighters. But if there's any single decisive day in the Battle of Britain, it's September 15th, when the RAF bravely faces a very formidable enemy and wins.